as well. We had to have the state archaeologists work with us to help in the redevelopment of the building. And now it's a very active building, 36 live-work units, a community gallery, and a sculpture garden on one side as well. One of our most recently completed projects is in an old International Harvester building in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Council Bluffs is about 40,000 people, but it's near Omaha, which is about 800,000. So it's a larger metro area than Fargo-Moorhead, but it's not dissimilar in many ways. And this conversion was for 36 live-work units, and then the white building that you see in the front is all non-residential space, commercial space, if you will. And there's a coffee shop, there's a hobby train store, and there's a clothing maker. So those are the non-residential tenants right now in that space. You can see also that there's a playground on the left side of this bill, or the left side of the picture, and that's because so many of the artists in the building have children. So you can imagine how these spaces and these neighborhoods will change over time just because of the presence of families downtown. Now, this, I'm told, is every single artist, whether they had to be photoshopped in or not, waving from the largest project we've ever done to date in Santa Cruz, California. This is 100 units of live workspace. It's all new construction. The phase 2 of this will be reutilizing some of the old tannery buildings for artist studio space, but you can imagine that on a tannery site, it was pretty difficult to consider reusing any of those buildings for residential. $6 million worth of environmental remediation went into this site. It's an 8-acre site, so it's quite large. So this is phase 1. Phase 2 is under construction, and that's the tannery buildings being reused for studio space only. And then phase 3, the community is going on to create a new center for dance and theater. And I should also mention that most of these projects that we're looking at are funded through a variety of funding streams that are available both from public entities and private entities. And I'll show you a couple slides later that show you where the funding typically comes from, although it's unique to every project and unique to every area. But we do use a lot of federal programs and state programs in not only financing these projects, but stabilizing them over the long term. This project in Seattle, Washington, this was an example of artists having been displaced for decades. And most of the artists had already moved out of Pioneer Square, which is their warehouse district. So it was really important to find a space to stabilize the artists and to bring them back into this area. While we were working on this project, there was an earthquake. And it was a big earthquake, and Seattle hadn't experienced an earthquake for 50 years. And fortunately, this building was a tank and nothing happened to it, but we were sitting in the architect's office at the time and we were questioning the amount of structural reinforcement that really had to occur in these buildings when the bricks started flying off of that building. So this project really came about because of the displacement of artists for decades. Then there was another wave of displacement because of the earthquake, because the earthquake affected 50 of their warehouse buildings. And we're very fortunate that this particular building was not affected. So we did 3 stories of new construction of live workspace over 2 buildings that are built on the side of a hill. So you can kind of see the slope and the grade on the left side of the photograph. It was originally a market, and so there were places in the sidewalk where they would take the carts, and they had bumps in the sidewalk to prevent the carts from taking off and going down the hill. Now there are 13 galleries in this in the bottom 2 floors of the building, and then the live workspace above. In Buffalo, New York, Buffalo is the second poorest city of its size in the country after Detroit. And Buffalo needed a lot of help. But what Buffalo had was amazing, amazing architecture. They couldn't afford to tear anything down. And so we probably looked at 16 to 20 different spaces that could have worked and were within their redevelopment zone. So Buffalo really wanted to keep and retain artists coming out of the many universities that were there. That was really important for them. So that was part of their goal. And they wanted to provide a bridge between a historically Caucasian neighborhood and a historically African-American neighborhood. And they thought artists would be a good bridge between those two neighborhoods. So this project, in the background, you see an electric car factory, and that has 24 units of live workspace and a ground floor gallery space. And then you'll see the new construction of 6 fourplexes that's also part of that project. We've done a lot of that in recent years, where you've taken a historic building that wasn't quite big enough to satisfy the market demand, and then if you could get the lot behind it or the lot in front of it, also do the new construction as well. One of our bigger challenges and crazier things that we've ever done is picked up and moved a historic theater. This was in the Guinness Book of World Records, the heaviest building ever to be moved on rubber tires. And it was cracked off of its foundation and moved to what we hope is its final resting place. And it's now part of a 3-building performing arts complex that opens on September 9th. So you can see the Masonic Temple on the left, the new construction infill building that will be the new entrance to the center, the Kohl's Center, and then the historic building, the Schubert Theater, that was moved. And this project came about because do you remember Block E downtown Minneapolis? Are any of you familiar with that? There were a lot of bars and sort of grungy activity happening on Block E, and the city was trying to encourage development on that spot. Well, they knocked down all the bars, but the historic theater still stood there. Well, no developer would touch that block with the historic theater still sitting there, because the historic preservationists were going to sue if it was knocked down. So the city was really between a rock and a hard place. Do we knock down this building and get sued by the historic preservationists? Do we move this building? So we did a reuse plan for the city and found out that it was dancers that really needed a space. Symphony, all the symphonies had their space, theater companies had their space, but dance companies really didn't have a venue. So that was what this building was created particularly for dance. So we picked up the building. The city paid $4.5 million to pick that building up and move it 2 blocks. And there's a wonderful, it was on the History Channel, a wonderful little video of the building actually moving. When we were watching it move, it was almost imperceptible until it had to cross a major intersection at 6th and Hennepin, and then they had to speed it up. But it took every rubber tire in North America to move that building. This is another big challenge for us in New York City. This is a building that is in Spanish Harlem or East Harlem. It's at 99th and 3rd. It's an old school building. Schools make great reuse for artist space. You can see there's practically floor-to-ceiling windows in here. This will be 90 units of live workspace, and the ground floor will be for a hip-hop space for a hip-hop organization. Called Hip Hop Theater Festival. It's a wonderful area. It's surrounded by public housing, but it's also surrounded by green space. And we know that this project will be particularly for Latino artists in the neighborhood. And that was the crying demand here. The East Harlem, the culture there was being threatened by development, and more artists were moving out of this area as development was encroaching. So it was really, really important for the city to maintain space for those artists to still be in the area and be part of the renaissance of that area. Minot. This is a rendering of a new construction project in Minot, North Dakota. We just recently received an allocation of low-income housing tax credits from the state. We found out maybe 4 weeks ago that we had the allocation, and so we're moving forward on a project. It will be 32 live-work spaces and about 4,000 square feet of non-residential space right downtown. Another project we took on, which was very different, we worked with a new organization that was forming into a nonprofit, and we worked with them to redevelop this building for the fire arts. And they were all teachers of fire art kinds of crafts. So everything from jewelry making to slump glass blowing to sculpture making. And so the interior of this building is filled with heavy-duty equipment for all of those arts and crafts. So let's look at some of the interior spaces here so that you can get an idea of what these spaces look like inside and how artists change these spaces. This is a live-work unit in a project outside of Washington, D.C. and Mount Rainier, Maryland. And you can see how creative the artists are. We are very liberal in terms of what we allow the artists to do with their space. As long as they're not ruining their space, we want them to be creative. We want the hallways to be filled with art. We want the interiors to be filled with art. The point is to be productive creators of art, to give back to the community. Some spaces have community gardens that the artists have created, and I'll show you a picture of that. This is another picture of an interior unit in Seattle, Washington. You can see that the floor plans are very open, and that's by design, of course. Also showing that artists come in many forms. So I want to emphasize that you should think broadly, not just about visual artists, but also musicians and dancers and poets, etc. Here's a gentleman who converted almost his entire space into a recording studio. Amazing. But he still has a couch there. This is a studio space only. This is not a working space, and this is an artist in the building where we have our offices in downtown Minneapolis. This is an example of a community space, and when I say that, I mean the community can use the space, but the artists typically program the space. It's a 3-level gallery in Sailboat Bend neighborhood of Fort Lauderdale. It's actually featured in the paper today. It's been open for about 4 years, but the artists keep getting more and more active and keep getting more and more attention, and this is their primary way of selling their art and showing their art. So this is how they bring the community in. They don't pay for this space. So this space is actually part of the operations of the entire building, but it is not leased space. In almost every building that we do now, we create this kind of space because artists have come to us over the years and said to us, it's important to our ability to give back to the community to be able to sell and show our work as well. And you know, the galleries take a big cut of the artist's work when they're selling it in galleries, so it's wonderful to be able to have a free space to show and sell that work. This is an example of a small performance space in the Hennepin Center for the Arts, the Masonic Temple. A dance space, just showing that artists have families, reminding you of that. This is an arts organization who's kind of an anchor tenant in a project in Reno, Nevada. Another arts dance group. This is a coffee shop in the Northern Warehouse in Lowertown, St. Paul. And it doubles as a performance space and a gallery space as well. And an important place for the artists to gather together. This is a wine bar. This is Springboard for the Arts, which is the arts service organization I was mentioning before that does classes and workshops for individual artists. They also have, are you familiar with